The clock on the dashboard showed 8:45 p.m. as Officer Ryan Miller adjusted his patrol car's heater. October nights in Lakeside got cold quickly, and this evening was no exception. 3 months into his job with the Lakeside Police Department, Miller was still trying to prove himself worthy of the badge he'd worked so hard to earn. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17, patrolling Maple Avenue, heading east." Miller spoke into his radio, his breath slightly visible in the cool air of his cruiser. "Copy that, Unit 17," came the crackling response. Miller drummed his fingers on the steering wheel as he scanned the nearly empty streets. Tuesday nights were usually quiet in this part of town. Most folks were home having dinner or settling in for the night. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and occasional headlights flashed by in the opposite lane. That's when he spotted it, a black SUV with windows that seemed too dark, even in the night. Miller squinted as the vehicle passed under a streetlight. Those windows had to be beyond the legal tint limit. He'd been briefed on this during his training. Excessive window tinting was not just a minor infraction, but a potential safety issue for officers who couldn't see inside vehicles during stops. "Let's run the plates first," Miller muttered to himself, following procedure. He typed the license plate number into his cruiser's computer while keeping the SUV in sight about 50 yards ahead. The screen lit up with information: a 2023 Ford Explorer registered to a private citizen named Charles Thompson. No flags, no warrants, nothing unusual. Just a regular civilian vehicle. Miller flipped on his lights. No siren. There was no need to cause a scene for a simple traffic violation. The SUV's brake lights immediately lit up red, and the driver signaled before pulling into the empty parking lot of a closed hardware store. At least they were being cooperative so far. "Dispatch, Unit 17. I'm conducting a traffic stop at 1420 Maple, Dawson's hardware parking lot. Black Ford Explorer, license plate number Lima Tango 7498. Copy that, Unit 17. Do you need backup?" Miller considered for a moment. The driver had complied promptly, and the location was well lit. "Negative, dispatch. Routine stop for window tint violation. I'll check in within 10. Following his training, Miller adjusted his body camera, making sure it was recording properly. He touched his holster, secured but accessible if needed, and grabbed his flashlight from the passenger seat. Standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. As he stepped out into the chilly night air, goosebumps rose on his arms despite his long-sleeve uniform. Miller took a deep breath, standing behind his open door for a moment to observe the SUV. No suspicious movements, no passengers he could see. He approached from the driver's side, staying slightly behind the vehicle's pillar as he'd been taught. Safety first always. His boots crunched on a few fallen leaves as he stepped carefully toward the window, flashlight held in his left hand, right hand free near his belt. "Evening," Miller called out, trying to sound confident despite the nervousness that still lingered after dozens of traffic stops. "Lakeside Police. Could you lower your window, please?" The window hummed as it smoothly rolled down, revealing a well-dressed older black man. The interior light showed someone in his 50s with a clean-shaven face and short salt and pepper hair. He looked calm, almost expectant. "Good evening, officer," the man said, his voice deep and measured. "What seems to be the problem?" "Sir, I'm Officer Miller with Lakeside PD," he said, shining his flashlight briefly into the vehicle to check the empty passenger seat and back area. "I pulled you over because your window tinting appears to exceed our legal limit of 35%. The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I see. Would you like my license and registration?" "Yes, sir. Please keep your hands where I can see them while retrieving those items." With deliberate movements, the driver reached for the glove compartment, then his wallet. Miller watched carefully, flashlight beam steady, as the man extracted his license and vehicle documents. "Here you go, officer." Miller accepted the offered items, glancing down at the license. The name matched what the system had shown, Charles Thompson. But as his eyes moved to the address and other details, Miller felt a sudden jolt of recognition. The photograph. The name. The address in the nice part of town near the station. This wasn't just any Charles Thompson. This was Chief Charles Thompson, the new police chief who'd started just 2 weeks ago. Miller's stomach dropped as the realization hit him like a bucket of ice water. Miller's hand trembled slightly as he stared at the driver's license. The man sitting calmly in the SUV was the same person whose photograph hung in the main hallway of the police station. Chief Charles Thompson, the new boss everyone had been talking about, but whom Miller had yet to meet in person. "Is something wrong, Officer Miller?" Chief Thompson asked, his voice steady and controlled. Miller cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. "No, sir. Yes, sir. He took a deep breath. "You're Chief Thompson." A slight smile appeared on the chief's face. "That's right. Started 2 weeks ago." He gestured toward Miller's name badge. "And you're Officer Miller. I don't believe we've had the chance to meet yet." Miller felt his cheeks burning despite the cool night air. Of all the cars to pull over, he had to stop the new police chief. His mind raced, wondering if this would be the shortest police career in Lakeside history. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't recognize you," Miller stammered, handing back the license and registration with slightly unsteady hands. Chief Thompson accepted his documents, tucking them back into his wallet. "No need to apologize. You were doing your job." He glanced at his window. "You mentioned something about the tint." Miller nodded, trying to regain his professional composure. "Yes, sir. It appeared to exceed our legal limit of 35% light transmission." "I see." The chief looked thoughtful. "These are actually factory standard for this model. They're right at 35%, which is within the legal limit." Miller felt his stomach sink even further. Not only had he pulled over his boss, but he might have been wrong about the violation in the first place. I apologize for the mistake, sir." Instead of showing anger or disappointment, Chief Thompson's expression remained thoughtful. "Tell me, Officer Miller, what made you notice my vehicle tonight?" The question caught Miller off guard. Was this some kind of test? He decided honesty was his only option. "The windows appeared darker than usual when you passed under the streetlights, sir." "I couldn't see the driver clearly, which is a safety concern during traffic stops." The chief nodded slowly. "And did you follow all proper procedures before pulling me over?" "Yes, sir. I ran the plates first and confirmed the vehicle wasn't flagged in the system. I called in the stop to dispatch and activated my body camera before approaching." Something shifted in Chief Thompson's expression. Was that approval? "Would you mind stepping out of the road for a moment, Officer Miller? I think we should talk." Miller's heart raced. This was it. He was about to get fired right here in the Dawson's hardware parking lot. "Yes, sir." Chief Thompson turned off his engine and stepped out of his SUV. He was taller than Miller expected, with broad shoulders under his tailored coat. The chief walked a few steps away from both vehicles toward a small grassy area at the edge of the parking lot. Miller followed, trying to prepare himself for whatever was coming. The night had suddenly become the most stressful of his short career. "Relax, son," the chief said, noticing Miller's tension. "You're not in trouble." Miller blinked in surprise. "I'm not." "No." Chief Thompson looked up at the night sky for a moment before turning his full attention to Miller. "Tell me something. How many traffic stops have you conducted since joining Lakeside PD?" Miller thought for a moment. "Probably around 40 or 50, sir." "And how many of those stops involved black drivers?" The question made Miller pause. He hadn't kept count, but he tried to think back. "Maybe 10 or 12, sir. I'm not entirely sure." The chief nodded again, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the parking lot. "And did those stops proceed differently than the others in any way?" Miller felt uncomfortable, but continued to answer honestly. "No, sir. I follow the same procedures with everyone." "I believe you do," Chief Thompson said quietly. "But I want to share something with you." He adjusted his coat against the evening chill. "Do you know how many times I've been pulled over in my 30 years as a police officer?" Miller shook his head, unsure where this conversation was heading. 73 times, the chief said. 73 stops while off-duty driving my personal vehicle. And I've been in law enforcement since I was 22 years old. The number hung in the air between them as Miller tried to process what he was hearing. Miller shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to process what Chief Thompson had just told him. 73 traffic stops. The number seemed impossibly high. 73, sir? Miller repeated, his breath visible in the cold night air. Chief Thompson nodded, his eyes never leaving Miller's face. That's right. 73 times in 30 years. Even after I made detective. Even after I became a lieutenant. Even after I had my captain's bars. He gestured to his SUV. Even in unmarked department vehicles sometimes. A car drove past on the main road, its headlights briefly illuminating both men standing in the parking lot. Miller noticed for the first time that Chief Thompson wasn't wearing a uniform, but rather a well-tailored dark blue suit with a matching tie. He looked every bit the department head he was. "I don't understand, sir," Miller said honestly. "Why would other officers pull you over so often?" The chief smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. "Think about it, Officer Miller. What made you notice my vehicle tonight?" Miller replayed the moment in his mind. "The window tint, sir." "Are you sure?" "Because these windows are exactly at the legal limit." "I specifically ordered this vehicle with factory standard tinting." Chief Thompson took a step closer. "Could there have been something else that caught your attention, something you might not have consciously registered?" Miller felt a knot forming in his stomach. "Sir, I swear I didn't know it was you. I would never have." "That's not what I'm suggesting," Chief Thompson interrupted gently. "I believe you when you say you follow the same procedures with everyone. But I'm asking you to consider whether something else might have influenced your decision to look more closely at my vehicle in the first place." The implication hung in the air between them. Miller wanted to deny it immediately, to insist he hadn't pulled over the chief because he was black. But something stopped him. A nagging doubt that made him pause and truly consider the question. "I don't know, sir," he finally admitted, his voice quieter than before. "I noticed the windows seemed dark, and I couldn't see the driver clearly." Chief Thompson nodded, seeming to appreciate Miller's honesty. "That's a start. Being willing to ask yourself these questions matters." He looked up at the night sky for a moment. "You know what I was thinking when I saw your lights in my rearview mirror tonight?" Miller shook his head. "Here we go again," Chief Thompson said simply. "I was thinking, here we go again. Not anger, not surprise, just resignation, because it happens so often that I've come to expect it." Miller felt a tightness in his chest. "Sir, I feel terrible." "Don't," the chief cut in. "This isn't about making you feel bad, Miller. It's about awareness." He gestured toward the street. "Look, I could have flashed my badge as soon as you approached. I could have pulled rank. But I didn't because I saw an opportunity." "An opportunity, sir?" "Yes." Chief Thompson's expression softened slightly. "I've been trying to meet all my officers, but our schedules haven't aligned yet. So when I saw your name tag, I realized this might be my best chance to have an honest conversation with one of my newest team members." A gust of wind blew through the parking lot, rustling the few remaining leaves on a nearby tree. Miller zipped his jacket higher, still trying to process everything the chief was saying. "The truth is, Miller, I bought this SUV with these specific windows for a reason," Chief Thompson continued. "In my last department, I started a program where we used traffic stops as training opportunities. I found that real-world encounters were more effective than classroom scenarios for addressing certain issues." Miller's eyes widened as understanding dawned on him. "You mean you wanted to be pulled over?" The chief smiled, and this time there was a hint of warmth in it. "Not exactly. But I knew it would happen eventually, especially being new to town where officers wouldn't recognize me right away. And when it did happen, I wanted to use it constructively." Miller ran a hand through his hair, not sure whether to be relieved or more anxious about where this conversation was heading. "Sir, am I in trouble or not, sir?" Chief Thompson actually chuckled at that. "No, Miller, you're not in trouble, but I am going to ask something of you." "Anything, sir?" Miller responded immediately. "Don't give me your answer so quickly," the chief cautioned. "Listen to what I'm asking first." His expression grew serious again. "I want you to be honest with yourself about tonight. Really think about why you noticed my vehicle. Then, tomorrow morning at 9, I want you to come to my office so we can continue this conversation." Miller swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Good." Chief Thompson extended his hand. "Until tomorrow, then." The next morning arrived too quickly for Miller. He barely slept, replaying the traffic stop over and over in his mind. By the time he parked his car in the department lot at 8:45, his stomach was in knots. The station buzzed with morning activity. Officers changing shifts greeted each other with tired smiles and paper coffee cups. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the radio system. It all felt so normal, which made Miller's situation seem even more surreal. He nodded hello to a few colleagues, trying to act natural while making his way to the chief's office on the second floor. No one seemed to be looking at him differently. Apparently, word hadn't spread about his encounter with the chief. "Morning, Miller," called Officer Pat Chen from the break room doorway. "You're in early today." "Yeah," Miller managed. "Got a meeting." Chen raised an eyebrow. "With the new chief. What's he like?" "I haven't met him yet." Miller hesitated. "He's thoughtful. You'll see." The chief's office door was open when Miller arrived. Through the glass wall, he could see Chief Thompson reviewing documents at his desk. The office was surprisingly simple, no fancy decorations or imposing furniture, just practical bookshelves filled with law books and framed certificates on the walls. Miller knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Come in, Miller," Chief Thompson said without looking up. "Close the door behind you." Miller did as instructed, his palms sweaty as he stood at attention just inside the door. "Have a seat," the chief said, finally looking up and gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Did you get any sleep last night?" "Not much, sir," Miller admitted, lowering himself into the chair. Chief Thompson leaned back, studying Miller's face. "I imagine not. So did you think about our conversation?" Miller nodded. "I did, sir. A lot." "And?" Miller took a deep breath. "I've been asking myself why I really pulled you over. The window tint was part of it, but—" He paused, finding the words difficult. "I think maybe I was more suspicious because I couldn't see who was driving. And when I did see—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Chief Thompson nodded slowly. "That's honest. Thank you." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. "Did you know that our department has been tracking traffic stop data for the past 5 years?" Miller shook his head. "The numbers show that black drivers are pulled over at twice the rate of white drivers in our jurisdiction," the chief said, opening the folder to reveal charts and statistics. "And once stopped, that vehicles are searched 3 times more often, despite those searches yielding contraband less frequently." Miller stared at the numbers, feeling a heaviness settle over him. "I'm not sharing this to shame you or anyone else," Chief Thompson continued. "Most officers truly believe they're being completely fair and unbiased. The problem is what we call implicit bias, assumptions we make without even realizing it." "So what do we do about it?" Miller asked quietly. For the first time, a genuine smile crossed the chief's face. "That's exactly the right question, Miller." He stood up and walked to the window. "When I was a rookie officer in my 20s, I got pulled over 8 times in 1 year while off duty. The worst was when I was driving home from a swing shift at 2 a.m. The officer approached with his gun drawn because I matched the description of a suspect." Miller's eyes widened. "What happened?" "I very slowly reached for my badge and identified myself. The officer apologized and let me go." Chief Thompson turned back toward Miller. "But here's the thing. Even after I made detective, even after I became a supervisor, it kept happening. Not as often, but enough to remind me that the uniform doesn't protect me when I'm not wearing it." He returned to his desk and sat down. "I've spent my career trying to address this from within the system. Some departments resist these conversations. They see it as an attack. But it's not. It's about making us better at our jobs." "Is that why you took the job here in Lakeside?" Miller asked. Chief Thompson nodded. "Your former chief started collecting this data, which showed he was serious about improvement. When he retired, he recommended me for the position because of my work in this area." Miller sat up straighter. "I want to learn, sir. I want to do better." "I know you do," the chief said. "That's why we're having this conversation. The fact that you're willing to examine your own actions puts you ahead of many officers with twice your experience." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Here's what I believe, Miller. We can't fix what we won't acknowledge. But once we see it, really see it, we have a responsibility to address it." Chief Thompson reached for a small coffee maker in the corner of his office. "Mind if we continue this over coffee? I have a feeling we'll be talking for a while." Miller nodded, grateful for the slight break in tension. "Black is fine, thank you." As the chief prepared 2 cups, Miller glanced at the photos on the nearby shelf, family pictures, award ceremonies, and one that caught his eye. A younger Chief Thompson standing beside an older white officer, both smiling widely. "That's Captain Howard," the chief said, noticing Miller's gaze as he handed him a steaming cup. "My first mentor. He was the one who pulled me aside after my 5th traffic stop complaint and asked me some hard questions." "Complaints?" Miller asked, blowing on his coffee. "Not from me," Chief Thompson clarified, settling back into his chair. "From citizens who felt they were being stopped for no good reason. Howard noticed I had more complaints than other officers and wanted to know why." Miller shifted uncomfortably. "What did you tell him?" "I defended myself, of course." The chief took a sip of his coffee. "Told him I was just being thorough, following my training. But he made me ride with him for a week, and he pointed out every time I focused more attention on certain drivers than others. By the end of that week, I couldn't deny the pattern anymore." Miller stared into his coffee. "So you were doing it too?" "We all do, Miller. That's what I'm trying to help you understand." The chief leaned forward. "It's not about being a bad person or a bad cop. It's about recognizing patterns we've absorbed from everywhere: TV, movies, news, even our training." Outside the office window, the morning sun had fully risen, casting warm light across the room. Miller watched dust particles floating in the sunbeam as he considered the chief's words. "So what happened after that week with Captain Howard?" he finally asked. Chief Thompson smiled at the memory. "I got angry at first. Felt like he was calling me racist when I knew I wasn't. But then he said something I never forgot. 'This isn't about what's in your heart, son. It's about what's in your head and how that affects what you do with your hands.'" The chief stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out a thick binder. "After working with Howard, I started tracking my own stops. Every single one. Who I pulled over, why, what the outcome was." He handed the binder to Miller. "This is a copy of the training program we developed together years later." Miller opened the binder, finding detailed lesson plans, statistics, and personal accounts from officers. "The program has 3 parts," Chief Thompson explained. "First, awareness, recognizing that these biases exist in all of us. Second, data, tracking our actions to see patterns we might miss. And third, practice, actively working to override those automatic responses." "And it works?" Miller asked, flipping through the pages. "It helps," the chief said honestly. "We saw a 40% reduction in racial disparities in traffic stops in my previous department over 5 years. Not perfect, but real progress." Miller closed the binder, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. "Why are you showing me all this, sir?" "I mean, I'm just a rookie who made a mistake." Chief Thompson retook his seat, his expression serious. "Because you're exactly who needs to hear it most. Officers with 20 years on the job have deeply ingrained habits that are hard to change. But you're just starting out. You can build better practices from the beginning." The chief's phone buzzed with a message, which he briefly checked before continuing. "Plus, you did something last night that impressed me." "What's that, sir?" "When I asked if something besides the window tint influenced your decision, you didn't get defensive. You thought about it. You were willing to consider the possibility." Chief Thompson leaned back in his chair. "That's rare, Miller. Most people immediately shut down when their biases are questioned." Miller hadn't thought of it that way. He'd just been honest and terrified of losing his job. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now," Chief Thompson said, standing up, "we put theory into practice. I'm assigning you to help me implement this training program here in Lakeside." Miller nearly choked on his coffee. "Me? But I'm the one woe." "Exactly," the chief interrupted with a slight smile. "You're the perfect example of why we need this. And your willingness to learn makes you the perfect person to help others understand." Miller set down his cup, his mind racing. "What will the other officers think?" "They'll think you impressed the new chief enough to get a special assignment," Thompson said. "Which is true, by the way, just not in the way they might assume." 2 weeks later, Miller stood nervously at the front of the briefing room beside Chief Thompson. The room was packed with officers from all shifts, many looking curiously at the rookie who somehow landed a special assignment with the new chief. "Some of you might be wondering why Officer Miller is up here with me today," Chief Thompson began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "The short answer is that he helped me see something important about our department on my 2nd week here." Miller felt eyes shift toward him. His collar suddenly felt too tight. "What Officer Miller doesn't know," the chief continued, "is that I've been reviewing body camera footage from traffic stops across all shifts for the past 2 weeks, and I found patterns we need to address." A murmur rippled through the room. Sergeant Wilson, a 20-year veteran, raised his hand. "What kind of patterns, Chief?" Instead of answering directly, Chief Thompson clicked a remote, and a series of statistics appeared on the screen behind him. "These numbers show who we're pulling over, searching, and citing in Lakeside. I'm not going to tell you what to look for. Just take a minute and see what stands out to you." The room fell silent as officers studied the data. Miller already knew what they would see, the same disparities the chief had shown him in private. Officer Lee spoke up first. "Black and Hispanic drivers are getting stopped more often and searched more frequently," added Officer Rodriguez, leaning forward in her chair. "But finding less," Officer Chen pointed out, tapping the bottom line of data. Chief Thompson nodded. "That's right. And before anyone gets defensive, I want to be clear about something. These patterns exist in every department I've ever seen, including ones I've worked in myself." He clicked to the next slide, showing similar statistics from his previous department. "This is where I worked before. We had the same issues, but over 5 years, we made significant improvements by implementing a new training approach." Miller watched the faces of his colleagues. Some looked skeptical, others curious, a few uncomfortable. He remembered how he'd felt in the chief's office that first morning, the mix of shame, defensiveness, and eventual openness to learning. "Officer Miller will be helping me adapt this program for Lakeside," Chief Thompson continued. "Not because he's perfect, in fact, he'd be the first to tell you he's still learning, but because he showed something valuable, the willingness to examine his own actions honestly." The chief didn't mention the traffic stop specifically. Miller realized with relief. He was using the situation as a teaching moment without embarrassing him in front of the entire department. "The program has 3 main components," Miller said, finding his voice as he stepped forward. The chief had coached him on what to say, but the words still felt new on his tongue. "First, we'll be implementing new data collection for all our stops. Second, we're setting up a community ride-along program paired with listening sessions. And third, we're bringing in specialized training on implicit bias and decision-making." He expected groans or eye rolls at the mention of more training, but the room remained attentive. "This isn't about pointing fingers," Chief Thompson added. "It's about making us better at our jobs, more effective, more fair, and more trusted by the community we serve." After the presentation, officers broke into small groups to review sample scenarios. Miller found himself leading a discussion with 5 officers, including Sergeant Wilson, who had initially seemed skeptical. "So let me get this straight," Wilson said, leaning back in his chair. "The chief pulled you into this because of something that happened between you two." Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I pulled him over about 2 weeks ago, not knowing who he was." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Window tint," Miller admitted, which turned out to be perfectly legal. To his surprise, Wilson chuckled. "And instead of chewing you out, he gave you a special assignment? You lucked out, kid." "It's not quite like that, Sergeant," Miller said. "He used it as a chance to show me something important, and now he's asking us to help show everyone else." Wilson considered this. "Well, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Not sure how much a rookie and a chief who's been here a month can teach me about traffic stops." Miller remembered what the chief had told him about resistance. It was normal, expected even. "Maybe you can help teach us then," he suggested. "Your experience would be valuable to the program." The sergeant looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Huh. I'll think about that." By the end of the briefing, Miller noticed something unexpected. Officers were still talking in their groups, engaged in real conversations instead of rushing out the door. Something had shifted, if only slightly. It was a start. 6 months passed quickly. Spring arrived in Lakeside, bringing new leaves to the trees and fresh energy to the town. Inside the community center, a crowd gathered for the department's first annual Community Partnership Award ceremony. Miller adjusted his dress uniform nervously as he stood near the back of the room. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of his life. Working closely with Chief Thompson on the training program had changed how he saw his job, his community, and himself. "There you are," Officer Chen said, appearing beside him. "The chief's looking for you. Wanted to make sure you're ready for your part in the ceremony." Miller nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The room was filled with a mix of police officers and community members. Miller spotted Mrs. Washington from the Neighborhood Watch program chatting with Sergeant Wilson, who had eventually become one of the program's strongest supporters after initial resistance. Chief Thompson stepped up to the podium and the crowd quieted. He looked more at home now than he had 6 months ago, more connected to the department and the town. "Thank you all for coming today," the chief began. "When I arrived in Lakeside last fall, I saw a good department with the potential to be great. Today, I'm proud to say we're well on our way." He clicked through slides showing the results of their 6-month initiative. Traffic stop disparities reduced by 22%, community complaints down 34%, and officer satisfaction rates improved by 15%. "These numbers tell part of our story," Chief Thompson continued. "But the real changes can't be captured in statistics. They're in the new relationships we're building, the trust we're earning back, and the honest conversations we're having within our department and with our community." Miller watched as people nodded in agreement. The changes hadn't been easy. There had been tense meetings, officers who resisted, and community members who remained skeptical. But slowly, day by day, things had shifted. "Today, I want to recognize someone who played a key role in this journey," the chief said, scanning the crowd. "Officer Ryan Miller, would you join me up here?" A ripple of applause moved through the room as Miller made his way to the podium, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected to be singled out. "Officer Miller doesn't know this," Chief Thompson said with a slight smile, "but he and I have a special connection that began before most of you even knew I had accepted the job here." The room grew quiet with curiosity. "On my second week in town, before I had met most of the department, I was driving home one evening when I saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror." The chief paused as a few people chuckled in realization. "That's right. Officer Miller here pulled me over, having no idea who I was." Miller felt his face growing warm as eyes turned toward him. The chief had never publicly shared this story before. Now, most chiefs might have immediately identified themselves, maybe even been annoyed by the inconvenience. Thompson continued. "But I saw an opportunity for something more valuable, an honest moment that could become a catalyst for change." He turned to Miller. "What Officer Miller did that night, and in our conversation the next day, showed me exactly what I needed to know about the potential of this department. When faced with a difficult truth, he didn't get defensive. He listened, he reflected, and then he committed to doing better." The chief picked up a small glass award from the podium. "This Community Partnership Award recognizes an officer who has gone above and beyond in building bridges between our department and the people we serve. Officer Miller has led our ride-along program, facilitated community dialogue sessions, and helped train every officer in our new protocols." As Miller accepted the award, he saw genuine respect in the eyes of his colleagues, something he couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. "I'd like to say a few words," Miller said, stepping to the microphone. "When Chief Thompson and I had that first conversation, I was sure my career was over before it had really begun." A gentle laugh rippled through the audience. "Instead, it was just beginning in a way I couldn't have expected," he continued. "What started as an uncomfortable moment became the most important lesson of my career, that real growth happens when we're willing to question ourselves and listen to perspectives different from our own." Miller glanced at Chief Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. "The work we're doing isn't finished," Miller concluded, "but I've seen firsthand how one honest conversation can grow into real change, and that gives me hope for where we're heading next." As he stepped away from the podium to warm applause, Miller caught sight of a familiar black SUV through the window. He smiled, thinking about how a routine traffic stop had set in motion changes none of them could have predicted, proving that sometimes the most important journeys begin with an unexpected detour.